Hello. Okay, so this presentation would be presented to Kentucky State Legislature, and it's my agency advocacy plan about Greenhouse 17. So Greenhouse 17 is a branch of the Kentucky Coalition Against Domestic Violence, or KCDVA, or KCADV, I'm sorry. KCADV mobilizes and supports members and programs and allies to intimate partner violence. The vision of KCDVA is to inspire the voice of survivors, create social change to ensure the safety of survivors, and to ensure their access to choices of services, address the root cause of intimate partner violence, hold abusers accountable, encourage development of trauma-informed laws, policies, procedures across all systems, and to prevent future acts of intimate partner violence. It's a pretty big vision to prevent the acts of intimate partner violence. The clients for Greenhouse 17 is anybody in Fayette and the surrounding counties. That's 17 counties, which is a Bluegrass Ad District. It's Anderson, Bourbon, Boyle, Clark, Estill, Fayette, Franklin, Garrett, Harrison, Jessamine, Lincoln, Madison, Mercer, Nicholas, Powell, Scott, and Woodford counties. Though at this moment in shelter can only be women and their children. We can't serve men in the shelter at this moment, but we can offer men survivors outreach services. And currently we are expanding. We did receive a grant to expand the shelter and to hopefully add some spots for men survivors in the shelter. Greenhouse 17 provides a 24-hour crisis line, emergency shelter, legal advocacy, individual and group support, medical and dental treatment, budget credit counseling, supportive housing services, transportation services, outreach services, children's advocacy, LGBTQ support, and substance abuse support to an extent for the substance abuse. For my interviews, I interviewed Laura, who's an MSSW, a family advocate case manager, and Kristen Feltner, who is a BSW, who is also a family advocate and case manager. Laura is actually my practicum supervisor. She and Kristen do the same job, basically. Though Laura does have some more intensive groups. And for the questions that we were supposed to ask our interview people, what types of people are served by the agency? Like I said before, anybody in the 17 counties who has experienced intimate partner violence. The federal policy that led to the development of the agency is VAWA, or the Violence Against Women Act. The purpose or mission of the agency, Kristen says, to help survivors, and Laura says to provide safety. And I've already read KCDVA, or it used to be KCDVA and now it's KCADV. Sorry, that's why I keep getting mixed up. I've already read their mission. I've already told you guys about the services that we provide, but there are a couple more added in here. There's a 24-hour crisis line, emergency shelter, legal advocacy, individual and group support, medical and dental treatment, budget and credit counseling, supportive housing services, transportation services, outreach services, children's advocacy. So the children's advocacy is mainly with the school systems, and it's making sure the school systems follow the McKinney-Vento Act if they're within Fayette County, which means that they make sure that the kids' school understands that they have to provide transportation for a year to the home school as long as it's still in the county, or they don't have to have all the necessary documents you have to have whenever you enroll in school, like a birth certificate and stuff like that, because they're homeless and they're fleeing domestic violence. LGBTQ support, substance abuse support to an extent. What types of jobs do they do? Case management, answering crisis calls, crisis intervention, case review, intakes, housing assessments, transportation, and anything else assigned, because it's a shelter. Things get messy. Sometimes you have to wash dishes, move furniture. So Other policies that affect Greenhouse 17, like I said, VAWA, KRS 209, which I'll talk about that a little later, KRS 403.715 to 0.785, which is EPOs. EPOs are extremely important in this line of work. It's good to know how they work, good to know what happens whenever you file an EPO, what happens when you go to court. So basically, you go to the circuit clerk and you say you want to file an EPO, you fill this out. If it's accepted, it'll be served to the perp. There will be a court hearing to decide if it turns into a DVO or not. If it turns into a DVO, it can go up to 3 years. If not, which it usually doesn't happen if they deny it, if not, that protection goes away. And if somebody does violate your EPO or DVO, they do go to jail. But it's a two-way street on that. What types of policy does the interviewee use in their daily life? So, like I said, EPOs, and then social work values, which I forgot to mention in the previous question. Social work values are ingrained into this agency, and it's really the only thing that guides them. Because Greenhouse 17 in itself does not have policies, does not have rules, really. Everything is kind of gray, and they go on a case-by-case basis. They are attempting to change that a little bit. They have hired someone to be kind of a supervisor of everyone, and he's really trying to get some policies and procedures in place, but right now there's none. Like I said, everything's case by case. There are no rules. And they do that because all of these survivors, they've had all these rules, they've had all these things set in stone that they're not allowed to do this, that they can't do this. They've had no self-determination. They've had no right to do as they want, to do as they please, to do as they see necessary. So for us to implement rules on them, it seems a little counterintuitive. We don't even have a curfew. We have a suggested time for you to check in. And we do not call it a curfew for that reason, because it feels like we're restricting, we're putting more of that power onto them. So we want to give the power back to the people. But like I said, hopefully there's going to be a little bit of structure with this new person. And then another one, what parts of policies that are used work well in the agency and what might be needed. Both Laura and Kristen agreed, and myself agreed, that there needs to be substance abuse policies, substance abuse programs within Greenhouse 17. Substance abuse is an extremely common co-occurrence with domestic violence, and I'll talk about that a little more later on. But that was the main focus. We all thought substance abuse needed to be more. What's working well? The fact that there are no rules. The women do really seem to get their self-determination back. Okay, so the policies that I'm going to talk about, like I said, KRS 421.57 and KRS 209A. And then I'm going to focus a little bit on Lexington's continuum of care policies, which is a blended of local, federal, and state policies all mixed into one. But I just put local because it's more on Lexington's focus of continuum of care. Okay, so 421.57 is Victims Advocates Law. So under Kentucky Crime Victims Bill of Rights, a victim of a crime has the right to become accompanied to all court proceedings by a qualified victims advocate. All KC, Kentucky Coalition Against Domestic Violence Shelters, are required by law to have a victims advocate. Victims advocates must be trained to know the difference between advocacy and practicing law. They are not allowed to cross that line to give legal advice. They can only be there for moral and emotional support. They must be there and be trained to be advocates in domestic violence, child physical and sexual assault, and rape. Like I said, they must only provide emotional and moral support. And Greenhouse 17 has several advocates throughout all 17 counties, and somebody has to be present at every court in the 17 counties while DV court is happening. KRS 209A was just changed and became effective June 2017. So before, the mandatory reporting laws for domestic violence. If you, as a social worker, found out that your client was in a domestic violence relationship, you had to report it prior to June 2017. This came with a slew of problems. So thankfully, they changed the law from mandatory reporting to mandatory education. The education includes resources, so you would have to tell them about Greenhouse 17, the Nest, you would have to tell them about the victims advocates, EPOs, you have to tell them about how to get an EPO and where to go to file it and what's going to happen, and you have to educate them about domestic violence itself. So you have to educate them about power control, you have to educate them about what domestic violence is. This law changed, like I said, in order to help survivors, to save survivors. Before, mandatory reporting could put survivors' life in danger if they were not expecting the police or if they were not planning on leaving. The abuser would assume that they did call because who else would call? And then more violence would end up occurring after the police had left because the abuser blamed the survivor. This law gives the self-determination that I've been talking about back to the survivor. It gives them the power to decide when they're going to leave, when they're going to report, if they're going to report, if they're going to leave. And then the continuum of care I was talking about. So that's Lexington Fayette has an interagency approach to homelessness. It's housing first in Lexington. The continuum of care is ran by the Lexington Fayette County government. Though Community Action Council has just taken over the COC list. So the Office of Homelessness Prevention and Intervention, or OPI, is what it's called, uses HUD, which is a federal policy's definition of homelessness. So there's 4 categories in HUD. So category 1 is literally homeless, somebody living in an emergency shelter, somebody on the street, somebody living in their car, somebody living somewhere not meant to be living. Emergency shelter, Greenhouse 17. Category 2 is an imminent risk of homelessness, so somebody in an eviction process, somebody who is about to be evicted, somebody at risk of losing their home. Homelessness under other federal statutes, so that is McKinney-Vento Act. McKinney-Vento states that couch surfing, it categorizes homelessness. Unfortunately, HUD does not consider couch surfing homelessness, even though you don't have a home of your own and you can be kicked out at any moment. HUD does not consider that homeless. Category 4 is fleeing and attempting to flee DV. That's 2 for Greenhouse 17. If you reside in Greenhouse 17, you're literally homeless and you're Category 4 as well. Rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing, which is both in Lexington, and Kentucky Coalition Against Domestic Violence also has their own rapid rehousing program for the counties except Lexington and Louisville cannot participate in KCDVA's rapid rehousing program because Louisville and Lexington have their own rapid rehousing and their own permanent supportive housing. So rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing assist categories 1 and 4. Those only. 2 and 3, can't help them. These are used through VS-SPLAT assessments. So it's vulnerability index assessments. These questions categorize people into categories of whether they need rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing. Permanent supportive housing is the more needy, the more in need. So either you qualify for one or the other based on this assessment. This assessment asks things like substance abuse, how long you've been homeless, if you have any chronic health conditions, if you're disabled, if you have severe mental illness, sorry, I almost used an acronym, things like that. So that's the policies that I assess that are in Greenhouse. All of these policies do not assess substance abuse. I love the housing first policy. I love that we want to do housing first and then assess everything else. I love the fact that we have victims advocates. I love the fact that we have mandatory education instead of mandatory reporting, but none of those address substance abuse. Substance abuse is huge in the DV world, especially in Greenhouse 17. So this is the 6 steps of policy analysis framework. That's from our book, actually. I just took a picture of it and threw it in my presentation. So the social problem that I'm addressing, like I said, is substance abuse within domestic violence. And again, like I said, while these policies are great and they help people escape violence, they don't address the deeper issues that our survivors have. One of the major barriers in leaving an abusive relationship, like I said, is substance abuse. Substance abuse co-occurs in 40% to 60% of IPV cases. That's one study. 40 to 60 in general of IPV cases. Not all people who abuse substances abuse their partner, but 40 to 60% of people who abuse their partner abuse substances. So it isn't really clear if substance abuse comes first or if IPV comes first. It's kind of that chicken or the egg conversation. But substance abuse is thought to cause more harm to their partner. 20% of perpetrators report using alcohol or drugs prior to their most severe acts of violence. And those who are pregnant and experience IPV are more likely to abuse substances than those who do not experience IPV and are pregnant. So our options, I'm going to skip the first one real quick and come back to it last because that's the one I want to focus on. So right now, do we do domestic violence counseling or do we do substance abuse counseling first? We don't really know. They're both 2 separate worlds. We don't think about them together, unfortunately, even though, like I said before, 40 to 60% of people who experience IPV experience substance abuse disorder. Or we can screen women in shelter for substance abuse in order to help survivors understand that substance abuse is a major barrier to safety. It is a major barrier that impacts your safety. But we need to do this in a way that ensures that safety is our priority and not catching somebody who is abusing substances, because there will be no legal consequences in shelter. That would be counterproductive. So working on both substance abuse and domestic violence have obviously shown improvements in other shelters. In Illinois specifically, this one study that I looked at, Illinois brought together substance abuse counseling and domestic violence counseling under the same roof and showed major improvement in their survivors. Right now, Kentucky is not equipped to help with substance abuse disorder in shelter. So my proposal is to provide DV shelters with either a partnership with a certified drug and alcohol counselor, or to ensure that all DV shelters have a certified drug and alcohol counselor on staff, which that one is the one I prefer. On staff, certified drug and alcohol counselor in shelter, in them with them every day, understanding the abuse, understanding their trauma, understanding their daily life, working with them side by side, integrating in that substance abuse counseling. So that's my proposal. And these are my resources. I hope you guys enjoyed it, because I enjoyed making it. Thank you.